What would you do if you came home and your entire farm, your family's legacy, had been bulldozed into a shopping mall? That's exactly what happened to Lucas Miller. After just 4 months away on a quiet consulting job, he returned to find his wheat fields gone, his barn leveled, and in their place, Willow Point Plaza, a multi-million-dollar monument to arrogance built by a corrupt HOA and their power-hungry president, Karen Monroe. They thought he was old. They thought he was done. What they didn't know was that he was watching, recording, waiting. This is the story of how one man turned silence into strategy, turned betrayal into a trap, and let an entire neighborhood's greed dig its own grave, brick by stolen brick. It's revenge without rage. It's justice with receipts. If you love true stories where karma wears steel-toe boots and corrupt HOAs get exactly what they deserve, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join us here on Real HOA Drama, where the lawns are fake, but the drama is very real. Because this isn't just a story. This is a reckoning. Lucas Miller hadn't been gone long, just 4 months, give or take. A consulting gig in Texas, meant to pad his retirement fund and keep his mind sharp before he officially hung up the boots. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet job helping a local co-op modernize their grain logistics. He missed Colorado, though. The crisp air, the hum of cicadas, and that soft golden glow his wheat fields caught at sundown. It was supposed to be a homecoming. But what greeted him wasn't wheat or wind. It was metal, steel, noise, and the stench of diesel cutting through his land like a knife through butter. The old oak tree at the ridge, the one that stood like a sentry for generations, was gone. Flattened. In its place rose a skeletal monstrosity of scaffolding, cranes, and heavy machinery clawing at the earth like it had wronged them personally. Where his wheat once swayed in the breeze like dancers in a chorus line, there now loomed the framework of a mall, Willow Point Plaza. The banner screamed in bold, soulless lettering. Lucas pulled his truck over, tires crunching the gravel in a way that suddenly felt unfamiliar. He sat there, hands still gripping the steering wheel, his heartbeat drumming a low, slow march in his ears. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be right." But it was. The dirt that once stained his boots was now hidden beneath poured concrete and backhoes. The fence he mended with his father back in '79? Gone. His red barn? Demolished. His land, his family's land since 1903, was being eaten alive, one bulldozer bite at a time. Slamming the door shut, Lucas trudged toward the site, his boots sinking into a landscape that no longer welcomed him. A man in a neon vest and white hard hat looked up from his clipboard, eyebrows raised. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, not unkindly. Lucas took a breath. His voice came out hard and gravelly, like it had been waiting years for this moment. "Yeah. You're standing on my land." The man, Rick Dalton, the name read on his badge, blinked, then frowned. "You the owner of parcel 1149? He asked. "That's right," Lucas said, his eyes narrowing. "The one with the old well and the blue barn, well, used to be blue." Rick shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we were told this land belonged to the Willow Crest HOA. Signed permits. County approvals. This project's been in the works for years." "I never sold it," Lucas snapped. "I never signed anything. Not 1 inch of this dirt belongs to anyone but me." Rick's face paled slightly. "You might want to speak with the HOA board. We're just following instructions." Lucas stared at him, then turned toward the row of luxury trailers at the far end of the site, the makeshift offices of the very people he now intended to confront. The air was thick with sawdust, tension, and something colder, betrayal. He walked away without another word, boots grinding against the gravel like protest. In his chest, something old stirred, something fierce and unrelenting. This land wasn't just acreage. It was legacy. His grandfather's hands had bled into this soil. His father's sweat had watered every harvest. And now someone thought they could erase that with paperwork and chain-link fences? Lucas Miller didn't believe in magic, but he knew something stronger. A man with roots doesn't bow easy. And he wasn't about to let anyone pave over his history, not without a damn good fight. The door to the HOA's temporary office was one of those over-air-conditioned, artificially bright trailers that tried too hard to feel important. Lucas barely knocked before pushing it open. The receptionist, a young woman too absorbed in her iced coffee and manicure to look surprised, glanced up with a half-curious raise of her brow. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," Lucas said, his tone low, steady, controlled. "Barely. Sure. 1 second." She stood slowly, walked to the door at the back, and knocked. "Ms. Monroe? Someone here to see you." The door opened, and there she was, Karen Monroe. If arrogance had a scent, she was bathed in it. Perfectly ironed blazer in power red, heels too high for construction gravel, and that same smug little upturned smirk Lucas remembered from 30 years ago when she used to show up at school board meetings just to argue about the color of the football jerseys. "Well, well," she purred, stepping aside to let him in. "Lucas Miller. You're back early. Didn't expect to see you till harvest season." Lucas didn't smile, didn't blink. He stepped inside, his boots leaving dusty tracks on her pristine white rug. "You want to explain what the hell you're doing building a damn shopping mall on my land?" Karen's expression didn't flicker. If anything, her smirk deepened. She reached across her sleek faux wood desk and pulled out a thick folder, flipping it open with deliberate calm. This parcel was designated for community use in the updated zoning map. "You were absent for months. The board voted. County signed off. Everything is stamped and sealed." Lucas snatched the papers from her hand, flipping through them with calloused fingers. Zoning approvals, committee meeting notes, glossy renderings. Not one single page bore his name, his signature, or even a reference to his consent. "This doesn't mean anything," he growled. "You've got a lot of signatures, Karen, but none of them are mine." She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and tilted her head. "Maybe your grandfather forgot to file something. Those old land deeds can be messy. You know how things get lost in the shuffle." Her tone was sweet enough to give a man a sugar coma, and every syllable oozed condescension, like she was explaining algebra to a dog. Lucas felt his jaw tighten. His pulse thudded in his ears. "I've owned that land since the day my father passed it to me," he said. "And my grandfather kept records like a librarian on a caffeine bender. If there's no sale, no transfer, no consent, then what you've built out there is trespassing." Karen shrugged, nonchalant. "If you feel that strongly, you can file a formal grievance." "But Lucas," she smiled wider now, and it wasn't kind, "I'd advise against making waves. This project is good for the community. Think of the progress." Lucas stared at her, words caught between his teeth. For a long second, the air between them felt like the moment before a thunderclap. Then he turned, didn't slam the door, didn't shout. He walked out in silence. But inside, the silence wasn't calm. It was the silence of gathering storm clouds. He could have filed an injunction that same day, marched straight to the county clerk with whatever papers they wanted, and shut the whole thing down. But something about Karen's face, that insufferable, untouchable smugness, told him there was something deeper going on.
"No, not yet."
Let her think she'd won. Lucas Miller didn't believe in revenge, but he did believe in justice. And the kind of justice he had in mind, it needed time to grow teeth. That night, Lucas didn't sleep. Not because he was tossing in anger, though Lord knows the rage sat under his skin like a live wire, but because he was digging. He hadn't opened the old green file cabinet in the study since his father's funeral. It still smelled faintly of dust, tobacco, and aged leather, like the past was folded up and waiting for someone brave enough to peel it open. His grandfather, Walter Miller, had kept every scrap of paper like it was holy scripture. Lucas used to joke that Walt could produce a receipt for a bag of seeds bought in 1947. Turns out he wasn't wrong. The first drawer yielded a brittle envelope labeled in his father's blocky script, "Title and Taxes, Parcel 1149. Then came the zoning maps, yellowed and fraying at the edges. Lucas laid them out across the kitchen table, like he was preparing for war. Because that's exactly what this was turning into. Next came the deed, original and notarized, transferring ownership from his father to him after the funeral in '96. That, plus every tax receipt for the last 27 years, crop rotation logs, even photos pinned with dates scrawled in ink. His land wasn't just claimed, it was defended by generations of paper and ink. But the deeper he dug, the more he felt something was still missing. Then he saw it, a small, flat folder tucked behind the drawer's back wall. Not in the cabinet itself, but inside the cabinet, wedged so deep, it took a flathead screwdriver and a string of colorful curses to pry loose. It was yellow, folded in thirds, labeled Protective Covenant, filed 1982, W. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, the weight of it heavier than the paper should allow. It wasn't just a deed. It was a legacy's last line of defense. The text was faded, but still legible, paragraph after paragraph in dense legalese, until he reached a clause near the bottom that made his heart skip. Any structure erected upon the parcel without the written consent of the deed holder shall, upon completion, be considered the sole property of said deed holder, regardless of financing, labor source, or intended use. Lucas blinked, reread, then read it aloud to the empty kitchen. "Sweet mercy," he whispered. "You brilliant old bastard." He took a photo of the document and drove 3 towns over the next morning, straight to the modest brick home of Marcus Bennett, his old college roommate turned real estate attorney. Marcus looked like time had bent him slightly, but not broken him. Same thick glasses, same deadpan voice that could make a tax code sound poetic. Lucas dumped the evidence across the kitchen table like a man emptying a revolver. Marcus sifted through it all, sipping black coffee. "This is airtight," he said finally, lifting the covenant with both hands like it might crumble. "This clause, it's not just unusual. It's weaponized. Your granddad didn't just protect this land, he booby-trapped it." Lucas leaned back, crossing his arms. "And the best part?" Marcus grinned. "HOA has no jurisdiction. The land's exempt from municipal annexation, zoning reassignment, and third-party governance. That includes Karen and her empire of overconfidence." The silence that followed was thick, part disbelief, part awe. Then Lucas smiled, slow and dangerous. "So, what you're saying is everything they build out there?" Marcus nodded. "If they finish it, every brick, every light fixture, every overpriced boutique, they're legally building it for you." Lucas stared at the covenant, heart pounding with something deeper than anger now. This wasn't just about stopping them. This was about letting them. And in that moment, a new plan was born, not out of vengeance, but out of blood, roots, and a grandfather's quiet brilliance. Lucas didn't need to fight them. He just needed to let them dig their own grave. And when they were done, he'd own the tombstone. Lucas Miller had been many things in his life: farmer, father, war veteran, reluctant PTA member, but he'd never fancied himself a chess player. Yet here he was, playing the longest, quietest game of his life. And the opening move? Doing absolutely nothing. No injunctions. No angry letters. No heated town hall speeches. Just silence. It unnerved Karen Monroe. He could tell. She was expecting a fight, wanted it even. People like her thrived on confrontation because they knew how to spin it. But what they didn't know how to handle was a man who smiled, nodded, and stepped politely aside while they hammered the nails into their own coffin. So Lucas played the part of the beaten old farmer. Showed up at HOA meetings and sat quietly in the back row with a blank notebook and a pen he never uncapped. He waved when neighbors passed. Said things like, "Maybe it's good for the community," with the same tone you'd used to say, "Maybe this milk won't kill me." But behind the curtain, he was gathering everything. He climbed trees at night like a wiry teenager and mounted trail cams beneath the branches, angled toward trenches and poured foundations. He flew his old drone over the construction site twice a week, collecting aerial photos and time-stamped footage of every inch of unlawful progress. When no one was looking, he rummaged through dumpsters outside the trailers and found treasure: contractor invoices, HVAC orders, bulk lumber receipts with HOA signatures in bold. Evidence. All of it. And he organized it meticulously, like his grandfather had taught him, with tabs, categories, and a folder labeled Transfer Case, Active. Meanwhile, the mall rose from the dirt like some monument to hubris. Beams stretched skyward. HVAC units were craned onto rooftops. Power lines dug into his earth like vines around a tombstone. Lucas watched from his porch as trucks rolled in day after day, delivering other people's money and ambitions straight into his trap. Karen Monroe was everywhere, smiling in hard hats, quoted in newspapers, strutting through the site with a clipboard she definitely never used. She called Willow Point Plaza a new chapter in community development, and herself a steward of progress. Lucas nearly choked on his coffee the first time he read that. And yet he never stopped her, never challenged her publicly. He wanted her confident. He wanted her careless. She thought his silence was surrender. But it wasn't silence. It was strategy. He clipped every press release, saved every photo of her next to the steel skeleton of his future retirement plan. She was doing half his legal work for him and didn't even know it. With every self-congratulatory interview, she was proving intent, knowledge, and overreach. Lucas knew the law would side with facts, not feelings. So he was gathering facts like seeds in spring, waiting for the right time to plant them. He didn't need to stop them from building. He needed them to finish. Because when they drove that final nail, unfurled that grand opening banner, and clapped their manicured hands under the mayor's grinning photo op, they wouldn't be unveiling Karen's legacy. They'd be cutting the ribbon on his. And Lucas would be waiting, with a quiet smile, a full folder, and a deed that trumped every brick they ever laid. Every good trap needs bait. But the best ones? The ones that truly sink their teeth in and don't let go? They've got something better, an insider. Enter Tyler Jenkins, Lucas Miller's nephew, and the last person anyone at Willow Crest HOA ever suspected. On paper, Tyler was just another tech contractor, 28, bearded, wore headphones more often than he spoke, and drove a dusty Honda that looked like it had survived 3 apocalypses. To Karen Monroe and her entourage, he was background noise. The IT guy who fixed the printer. The one they forgot was even in the room. But in truth, Tyler was the payload. Lucas had sent him in weeks earlier, right after his meeting with Marcus Bennett. It had been a quiet conversation over barbecue ribs and whiskey. "You want to help your uncle?" Lucas had asked. Tyler smirked. "Let me guess, you want me to do some espionage?" Lucas leaned back, boots on the porch rail. "Let's call it family preservation." So Tyler went in. And the minute he had a company email address, he started downloading everything. It started with innocuous stuff, staff rosters, building schedules, blueprints for the HVAC system. But then came the juicy bits, internal memos from Karen, marked confidential, discussing ways to shift HOA funds into project allocations without triggering member votes. Legal loopholes, financial gray areas, invoices labeled community branding that were, in reality, payments for neon mall signage and landscaping contractors. One particularly damning file was a scanned signature authorization. It bore Lucas's name, but it sure as hell wasn't Lucas's handwriting. Tyler flagged it, highlighted it, and sent it to his uncle with the subject line. You ever sign this?" Lucas stared at it for a full minute before replying. "Nope. But someone's about to wish I had." Bit by bit, the web unraveled. Tyler discovered a chain of correspondence between Karen and the treasurer, referencing something called the Quiet Transfer Initiative. It was a covert plan to reclassify certain parcels, Lucas's included, as community-maintained green space through ambiguous language, vague voter referendums, and buried amendments in HOA newsletters no one ever read. Worse still, they were already paying for it all, with residents' money. HOA fees had gone up 11% in the last year alone, but instead of new benches or paved trails, the funds were being funneled into site prep, contractor retainers, and slick PR campaigns, painting the mall as a community-backed miracle. It was fraud, plain and simple. And Tyler was downloading it all like it was a Black Friday sale. Some nights, he'd sneak out after work and meet Lucas behind the old grain silo, handing over USB drives in brown paper envelopes like they were trading state secrets. They'd sit on the tailgate of Lucas's truck, reviewing the files under the pale light of a lantern. You know, Tyler said one night, scrolling through a PDF marked non-disclosure addendum. Phase 3. These people are either evil geniuses or just really dumb. Lucas chuckled. The sound dry and dangerous. Both. And either way, we're going to bury them with their own paperwork. The picture was coming together now, not just a case of arrogance, but a carefully orchestrated land grab disguised as civic progress. Lucas had suspected corruption, but thanks to Tyler, now he could prove it. Because nothing screams poetic justice like using a mall built with stolen money to build your own fortune. It was the kind of bar where the jukebox still ate quarters and the bartender didn't ask questions. Dim lights, dusty bottles, and a lingering smell of old wood and cheap cologne. Lucas Miller hadn't set foot in Eddie's tavern in a decade, but when Karen Monroe asked to meet him someplace quiet, he knew exactly the kind of game she was playing. She was already there when he walked in, perched on a bar stool like a lawyer in lipstick, her martini untouched, her blazer so red it might as well have screamed warning. She didn't rise when he sat down, just crossed her legs and turned toward him with that familiar smile. "I figured it was time we talked," she said, voice honey-sweet and soaked in rehearsed charm. Lucas tilted his head. "Talk or negotiate?" Karen's smile widened. "Let's not pretend you're not sitting on something, Lucas. You're too quiet, too patient, which is either noble or tactical." He said nothing, just sipped his beer. "I know you don't want a mall on your land," she continued, reaching into her bag and sliding over a folder. "So, what if I gave you a reason to look the other way?" Inside the folder, numbers. Big ones. Projected revenue shares. Ownership stake offers. A private payout clause disguised as consulting compensation. It was the kind of deal most people would kill for. Lucas didn't even blink. "I'm not interested." Karen leaned in, her perfume too sharp, her tone too smug. "Come on, Lucas. You and I both know lawsuits are messy. Headlines are ugly. But this is clean. Quiet. You get your slice, we finish the build, and nobody has to lose." He looked her dead in the eye, calm as the prairie in winter. "I don't need money, Karen. I need justice." She chuckled like he was a senile grandpa turning down a scratch ticket. "Justice doesn't pay property taxes." Lucas smiled, reached into his pocket, and tapped the recorder clipped inside his shirt pocket. "You're right. But it does record felony bribery in full stereo." Karen froze. He stood slowly, slid the folder back toward her, and dropped a 20 on the bar. "Thanks for the drink. And the evidence." The silence she left behind said more than any insult she could have hurled. But Karen Monroe wasn't the kind to surrender, not without taking a cheap shot on her way down. Because by morning, Lucas's mailbox was open. Not metaphorically.
Physically.
The rusted green box at the end of his gravel driveway had been cracked open, its hinges twisted like someone had been in a hurry. Most folks wouldn't have noticed, but Lucas? Lucas noticed everything. He'd installed an infrared night cam in the oak tree across the street after the second time a mysterious trash citation showed up on his HOA notice. When he checked the footage, there he was, Karen's assistant, clipboard and flashlight in hand, fumbling like a raccoon with a criminal record. He rifled through envelopes, photographed a few, then scurried off like a man who knew he was doing something very, very wrong. Lucas downloaded the video, saved it to 3 USB drives, and titled the file, "Attempted Tampering, 3:12 a.m., Moron Edition." He didn't confront Karen. Not yet. He wanted her to think her play had worked, that the bribe had shaken him, that the mailbox stunt had rattled him. But it hadn't, because Lucas Miller wasn't playing checkers. He was playing chess. And Karen had just sacrificed her queen, without realizing the king had already crossed the board. By midsummer, Karen Monroe had stopped pretending to be polite. The construction site was booming, the steel skeleton of Willow Point Plaza growing taller by the day, and with every beam hoisted into place, Karen's crown gleamed a little brighter. She walked the streets of Willow Crest like a monarch, smiling for cameras, kissing babies, and quietly crushing anyone who dared question her reign. That's when the fees started rising. HOA dues were bumped up. Again, this time under the banner of community enhancement funding. Most residents grumbled but paid. Those who didn't, well, they were reminded. Fines began showing up in mailboxes like unwanted party invites, $50 for untrimmed hedges, $100 for a flower bed that didn't match the approved color palette. A retired librarian got cited for non-regulation lawn art because her garden gnome wore a tie-dye shirt. And then came the Bishops. George and Linda Bishop had lived 2 doors down from Lucas since Reagan was in office. They were the kind of neighbors who kept to themselves, baked cookies at Christmas, and watered their azaleas like clockwork. Linda sang in the church choir. George still wore his old Navy cap on Sundays. Quiet folks. Good folks. But one day, they made the mistake of asking a question. At a monthly HOA meeting, George raised his hand and, in the calmest voice imaginable, asked why there hadn't been a vote on the zoning variance for the new mall. "Isn't that something the community usually decides together?" he'd asked. Karen had smiled her usual plastic smile. 3 days later, the Bishops received a formal violation notice. Their garage door design, the same one they'd had since 1984, was suddenly non-compliant. A week after that, they were fined $300 for inappropriate lawn edging. By month's end, they were facing eviction under HOA Covenant Clause 9.7, repeated non-compliance subject to legal removal. Lucas was on his porch when they left. The moving truck sat quietly in the driveway while Linda stood by the front steps, clutching a box of porcelain teacups, her hands trembling. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But when she turned to Lucas and said, "We gave our lives to this place," her voice broke like glass underfoot. Lucas walked over without a word and hugged her. She finally let the tears fall. "They'll pay for this," he whispered into her hair. "I swear to you, they will." That night, Lucas didn't sleep. Instead, he compiled a report. Photos from his drone. GPS coordinates. Footage of backhoes digging directly through a protected wetland behind Lot 12. Aerial shots showing unpermitted drainage systems rerouted through tree roots, gravel poured where cattails once grew thick as stories. He submitted it all, anonymously, to the Environmental Protection Agency. 3 weeks later, the EPA confirmed receipt of a formal complaint regarding suspected environmental violations at Willow Point Plaza. The system had been manipulated, permits bent, and Mother Nature bulldozed, literally. Lucas didn't attach his name to the complaint. Not yet. He wanted to let the fire smolder on its own. Let the authorities circle. Let Karen sweat under her helmet. Let the residents whisper. Because the people were waking up. The illusion of Karen's progress was cracking like the sidewalk under her mall. And Lucas? Lucas was no longer the only one who knew she'd gone too far. He was just the first to sharpen his shovel. By late September, Willow Point Plaza was no longer just steel beams and poured concrete. It was alive. The lights were on, the air conditioning hummed, and the walls, God help them, were painted in elegant neutrals meant to evoke tranquility and affluence. Signs for Sunridge Yoga, Grain and Bean Cafe, and Fitcore Elite Gym were already hung, prepped for soft openings. The place smelled of ambition and fresh drywall. And Karen Monroe? She was glowing like a solar flare. Lucas Miller watched it all unfold from a distance, his arms folded across his chest, boots rooted in the soil that still legally belonged to him. The mall was nearly finished, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He knew the timing had to be perfect. This wasn't a petty dispute over fence lines or HOA landscaping violations. This was war. And wars weren't won by tantrums. They were won by patience, preparation, precision. So Lucas sharpened his smile and played the fool. He dusted off his best button-up shirt, polished the boots his grandfather had once worn to church, and slicked his silver hair to the side. When he stepped into the monthly HOA meeting that evening, heads turned. Some residents smiled cautiously. Others looked away. But Karen lit up like a chandelier. Well, she beamed from the head of the room. "Look who's come around." Lucas offered a small, gentlemanly nod. "I have to admit, Karen, the mall's looking impressive. Really pulled the whole place together." A ripple of surprise ran through the room. Karen's shoulders relaxed. She mistook the compliment for surrender, not realizing she'd just walked another step into the snare. "You know, I always believed this would bring us closer as a community," she said, her voice syrupy with pride. "I'm starting to see that," Lucas replied, folding his hands calmly in his lap. Truly inspiring. Behind his eyes, though, something cold and sharp ticked like a metronome. Because while Karen was preening under the attention, Lucas's briefcase sat at his feet, filled with everything she'd tried so hard to bury. Drone footage of unpermitted construction. Invoices showing HOA funds funneled into private contractors. Emailed memos from Karen discussing ways to reallocate reserve accounts without triggering votes. Photos of protected wetlands paved over without a single EPA notice. Screenshots of her assistant sneaking through his mailbox. A recording of her bribe offer at Eddie's Tavern, clear as a church bell. He had built an evidence binder so thick, it needed its own seat. And, in his jacket pocket, a signed offer from a real estate investment trust, prepared to buy Willow Point Plaza for $18.6 million, if and only if Lucas could prove ownership. Which, of course, he could. A protective covenant from 1982 guaranteed it, and Karen's recklessness guaranteed its enforcement. The only thing left was to let her cut the ribbon. Lucas didn't want to interrupt the parade. He wanted to be in the crowd, smiling, applauding, maybe even shaking hands. Let them take their photos. Let the local paper print her picture in front of her stolen empire. Because the higher she climbed, the better the view and the longer the fall. And when that moment came, when the confetti fluttered and the mayor raised his little golden scissors, Lucas would be waiting in the wings. Not with a protest, but with a title deed, a declaration, a thunderclap wrapped in manila folders. And the look on Karen Monroe's face? That would be the ribbon he'd been waiting to cut. The room was full, too full. Folding chairs had been dragged in from the adjacent hall, neighbors lined the walls, and a reporter from the Denver Herald was adjusting her lens near the back, scenting a story in the air like a storm rolling in. The banner on the wall read, Willow Crest Community Budget Forum, but what was about to happen would blow the word budget clean out of the dictionary. Lucas Miller stood near the podium, looking calm in his best denim and worn boots, the very image of a man with nothing to lose and everything to say. Karen Monroe sat 3 rows back straight, blazer pressed to perfection, with her usual smirk doing its best to stay afloat. To her right sat the zoning inspector. To her left, the HOA board, once smug, now starting to sweat. Lucas clicked the remote in his hand. The projector flickered. The first slide hit the wall behind him, an aerial drone photo of Willow Point Plaza shining in the morning light like a temple of modern consumerism, built directly on his farmland. This, Lucas said, voice steady, clear, is the completed structure known as Willow Point Plaza. Every foundation, every pipe, every square inch of construction you see here was done without my consent, on land that, according to every legal document in my possession, has never been sold, ceded, or transferred to anyone. The room rustled. Whispers. A sharp intake of breath. But Lucas wasn't done. He clicked again. Slide 2 appeared, a scan of the protective covenant, boxed in red ink. The killer clause. Any structure erected upon the parcel without the written consent of the deed holder shall, upon completion, be considered the sole property of said deed holder, regardless of financing, labor source, or intended use. He let the silence stretch. Filed in 1982, he said, and reaffirmed twice. Once by my father in 1996, and again by me in 2009. Karen's face drained of color, so fast it was like someone unplugged her. One of the board members leaned forward, whispering urgently in her ear. She didn't move. But wait, Lucas said, almost too casually. There's more. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a clean, crisp manila envelope, and unfolded the contents with deliberate grace. In this folder is a signed offer, he said, from Baxter Hill Commercial Investments, a national real estate trust, to purchase Willow Point Plaza for a total of $18.6 million, contingent on proof of sole ownership. He held up the signature page, letting the audience take it in. So, not only do I own every inch of what you built, but someone already wants to buy it. The room exploded. Some gasped. Others cursed under their breath. One woman clapped before realizing what she was doing. A man in the back stood up and immediately called his lawyer. The zoning inspector fumbled with his phone like it might bite him. Karen? She didn't move. She just stared forward, blinking slowly, mouth slightly open, like she'd taken a punch to the lungs and forgot how to breathe. Lucas clicked one final time. The screen now showed a photo of Karen in a hard hat, standing beneath a coming soon sign, her smile wide, proud, clueless. The caption read, "Built for the community. Built to last." Lucas looked out over the crowd. You used HOA funds, resident money. You raised dues, issued fines, and evicted families to build a project on land you never owned. Then he turned to Karen, his voice dropping to a razor's edge. You didn't just break the rules. You built your empire on someone else's soil, and now you're going to watch it crumble. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time, the Queen of Willow Crest had nothing to say. And that, Lucas thought, was the sweetest sound of all. Karen Monroe didn't go quietly. For the first few days after the meeting, she strutted around like a peacock with a limp, still attending board meetings, still signing memos like her pen had power. But it didn't. Not anymore. Because the tide had turned. And when it did, it came fast. By the end of that week, a special emergency HOA session was called, without her. The board, now a pack of nervous defendants trying to save their own skins, voted unanimously to remove her as president. Karen's nameplate came off the office door before the meeting even ended. Her assistant, the clipboard-carrying stooge who thought mailbox tampering was just another Tuesday errand, was subpoenaed for unauthorized data access and federal mail interference. Turns out he hadn't deleted a single file. Bless his heart. The financial audit followed right behind. Once residents realized their HOA dues had been used to finance Karen's community project, without proper vote or oversight, they erupted. Refund demands, legal threats, and at least one handwritten letter that simply read, "Where is my fountain, and why is there a gym instead?" The treasury account, once flush with years of resident contributions, was bone dry. Burned away on Karen's glossy banners, catered ribbon cuttings, and the leased BMW, she insisted, was a mobile command unit. The neighborhood that once feared her now couldn't wash their hands of her fast enough. And the mall? It sold within days. Lucas signed the papers with a pen his grandfather had kept in a wooden box labeled "For important moments only." $18.6 million hit his account the same afternoon. No liens, no lawsuits, no strings. He was the sole, uncontested owner of a monument someone else had built and paid for, with stolen bricks. The buyers, a commercial investment firm with a taste for poetic irony, agreed to his one request: change the name. 2 weeks later, a sleek new sign was hoisted above the main entrance, in letters bold and clean. Miller Commons, right where Willow Point Plaza used to scream its lie. Lucas didn't go to the unveiling. He didn't need to. He saw it from his porch, coffee in hand, steam curling into the cool morning air. The same porch where he once watched the fields sway golden, where he used to sit beside his father after long days of harvest. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He watched the work crews polish the windows of his mall, and a smile crept across his face. Not smug, not bitter, just content. Because the thing about revenge is it always leaves a stain. But justice? Justice leaves roots. He didn't tear Karen Monroe down. He simply let her build her own gallows, with scaffolding, optimism, and someone else's money. He didn't push. He didn't threaten. He just waited. And when the dust settled, all he had to do was step forward and claim what was always his. Later that week, a neighbor asked him, half joking, half reverent, if it felt good to finally get even. Lucas just chuckled, took another sip of his coffee, and looked toward the mall glowing in the sunrise. "I never needed revenge," he said.
They did it to themselves.
Greed's funny that way. Always thinks it's in control right up until it isn't. And with that, he leaned back in his chair, boots crossed, heart steady. The kingdom was gone. But the land? The land was still his.